Hello! This is part 2 in the Erica rates all the books that she's read in the past 3 months. Previously, I did a video on all of the YA fantasy books that I have read from January through March. That is going to be linked in a little card box. I'm uploading a second video because that video was running way long, which is going to rank the nonfiction books and the adult fiction books that I've read and rank them on this tier system that I've made myself because I'm too lazy to go use anybody else's system. The tier system is double exclamation points means, wow, I could not stop talking about this book. One exclamation point means, wow, this is a good book, exclamation point. Period means, yeah, was a book. I had a fine time. Sort of middle of the road, like on the good side, would recommend to other people, but some things were like, just okay. The comma books are the books that I liked enough, but there are so many things that I have to say that kind of like negate some of the good things that they fall into a category where I was like, I had too many things that I could complain about, so the book as a whole couldn't really stack up to this sort of like declarative, yeah, good category. And then we have the ellipsis category. The ellipsis category means that I just don't have very much to say because I struggled to read the book. If I struggle to read the book, it usually means something is wrong. Okay, let's start with the nonfiction books because they are closer to me right now. I've only read 4 nonfiction books so far this year, but I think that's actually pretty good for 3 months for me. Like, I'm usually not really into nonfiction. And so the book on top of the pile that I read this year is called Making Whiteness, The Culture of Segregation in the South from 1890 to 1940. It is by Grace Elizabeth Hale. This is a history book about white people and the South and how the idea of like cultural whiteness grew as an identity, and yeah, just looking at the growth of racism in the American South instead of as a clear construction of what blackness is, as a clear construction of what whiteness is and sort of what that in-group looks like. I thought this was an excellent book. I bought this at the Legacy Museum in Montgomery last December. I bought several of the books that I'm reading right now there. I picked up this book first because I wanted to, I thought it was really interesting to look at the power of what whiteness is, because as has been noted by a lot of other scholars, like when you are marked as white people tend to get offended because they don't, like, we've never been marked. We've never been noted as being like racially different. And so I think it's really, I've been into a lot of media lately that looks critically at what whiteness as an identity group is, because I think it's a really important part of the conversation, to sort of force white people to realize like, no, we are a group and we make group choices that have been overwhelmingly negative for non-white people and anyone or white people who don't like meet the cultural standards of white people. And so we really need to come to terms with the fact that like we have constructed this identity based on power, and dismantling those power structures means dismantling the comforts of whiteness and the normalcy of whiteness. So anyways, all that is to say, this is one of the books that really launched that sort of thinking for me. I really enjoyed, there's a section towards the end that talks about cultural monuments and is named after Stone Mountain, which is a solitary mountain it's very small for a mountain, solitary mountain in North Georgia, where a bunch of Confederate generals are carved into the side of the mountain. And I visited that place a lot as a kid because I grew up just outside of Atlanta. And so it's just really interesting to like look back at that place that I've grown up with and like that I never really questioned until I got into high school and college, and understand the ways that places like that really have influenced culture more broadly. So I had a lot to say. I think I'm gonna put this book in this 1 exclamation point category because like while I was reading it, the whole time I was like, yeah, good book, good book. Next book is Ticker by Mimi Schwartz. This is a history of the Texas Medical Center and the race to find the to create an artificial heart. I live in Houston and I went to school at Rice, so right across the street from the Texas Medical Center. So I have a lot of friends who are in the Texas Medical Center all the time, and it's a place that I have a lot of cultural awareness of. I read this book on a recommendation because I was looking for more books that had to do with Texas and Houston in particular, and so this just seemed really interesting to me. It was pretty interesting. I think I was thrown out of this book several times, not of the author's fault. This is a story of arrogant asshole men and the rich people who are funding their work. And I understand that a lot of the time in our society, the way things get approved is there's got to be money. But there were a lot of places where like you can tell that the doctors and the engineers and the folks who are working on these projects really want to be able to do these projects for the good of people, but can't because they can't get investment because nobody's interested. That's really frustrating, and I think I just like there's just enough praising of like the way that system works, where like you can't expect people to do good things for other people. You have to pay them in order to do it. There was enough praising of that in this book that it just threw me enough that I was like very frustrated by the time it ended. Like I recognized that I would want to hang out with absolutely none of these people. Absolutely none of the figures in this book I would want to be friends with or I would want to associate with. Yeah. So for what it was, I think it was a good book. If you can put up with that stuff, good. I am going to put it in this comma category because the boot looking really bothered me and irked me enough where it was hard for me to keep reading in certain places. Alright. Next, I read Eloquent Rage, A Black Feminist Discovers Her Superpower by Brittany Cooper. I really enjoyed this. I think this is a great book if you are looking for more avenues into feminism and into feminist theory, and especially Black feminist theory. I think you need to pick up this book because it's a really accessible dive into really deep ideas. I think Cooper does an amazing job of making really like deep points and really good points that about like how power works in our society and how how race and gender intersect. And I think the way she does that though is really like it works, I think, for anyone, no matter how much no matter what level of feminist theory you're coming to this with, no matter what level of like anti-racist thinking you're coming into this book with. There's enough pieces that you can either understand the points that are being made if you don't have a good history and a good base of theory, or if you do have some expertise and some like understanding of this theoretical field, you can make those connections to other theorists and other thinkers and find out what Cooper's own thinking is. And so I think her ability to appeal to all these different types of audiences is really powerful. And so I've just been recommending this book up and down to every person I interact with. It's also pretty short and like so accessible. I read this book so quickly and got so much out of it. So for me, this is definitely in that 2 exclamation points, heck yeah, book. Okay, the last nonfiction book I read is Stamped from the Beginning by Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. This is a definitive history of racist and anti-racist ideas in America. Kendi announces just from the beginning how he's defining racist thinking, and it is particular to anti-Black thinking. So like racism, as Kendi defines it, is thinking that Black people are inferior to others. And so from that theoretical like definition that he lays out at the beginning, he then traces American history, like all the way back to like the first encounters with racist thinking and how racist thinking has grown and how anti-racist ideas and progress has been made. It's a really good book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's long, I will say. If you're interested in history, if you're interested in equity, if you're interested, like racial equity has been on my mind, as you can probably tell from the selection of books that I've already read. But I think if you're looking for kind of like a one good book to really launch your thinking into understanding race in American history, I think this is a great book that you should definitely consider picking up, because like even though it is long, it's really readable. The text is pretty large. It's broken up well enough that you can like find easy accessible breakup points to the reading. And I think it was just, yeah, this is definitely worth a read. I'm not sure whether to put it in this 2 exclamation point category or the 1 exclamation point category. And so for now I'm going to put it in the 1 exclamation point category, because I think if I'm holding back, that is telling me that I didn't yell up and down the rooftops, which I did with Eloquent Rage. So let me put that here for now. that's that. Okay, let's move on to fiction. I have read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fiction books so far in 2020. Let's start with the book on top, which is Erin Morgenstern's wow, I almost said The Night Circus. That's the other one. The Starless Sea. The Starless Sea is a love letter to books and to storytelling in general. It follows Zachary, who gets swept into this secret society of bookkeepers and this secret library that exists sort of in a pocket plane between other places that is perched above what is called the Starless Sea, which is a big, vast sea. You can see I'm getting confused because I read this entire book and I was engaged the whole time. But I have no idea what this book was about. I have no idea what happened. I only know that I enjoyed myself. That's very strange. I don't, this isn't one of those speechless moments where I'm like, well, I'm speechless because I struggled my way through this book. No, I read this book really quickly and really thought it was beautiful. There are so many just, neat moments, and it's a good book. It's good, but I couldn't tell you what it's about. It's definitely, a visual onslaught and, a very atmospheric experience the whole way through. And so I think that if you're into that sort of book, and if you don't really need to understand what's going on to be completely immersed in the book, then you'll like it, I think. Also, if you're into bees, I'm really into bees as an aesthetic, and I almost cried several times because there's so many good bees in this book. They're just so good, and I love them, and I'm getting kind of tight-chested just thinking about how much I love bees. I'm gonna put it in the period category because there's so many things that are just confusing, and I think it's not a great sign that I can't tell you what happened in the book, but I do know that I liked reading it, so that's something. Yeah. Next book on my list is a book I've had on my shelf for ages. I've had this book since at least May 2013 because they are advertising And the Mountains Echoed. This is A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. I love Hosseini's books. I read Kite Runner in 9th grade because it was the required book for 9th grade English at my school. And it was one of the most intense emotional experiences I have ever encountered with a book. And so I picked up A Thousand Splendid Suns immediately once I finished Kite Runner, and then didn't read it for a very long time because I knew it was going to be heavy and that type of deep emotional experience, and there were just so many times where I just wasn't ready for it, and I'm actually really glad that I waited. So this book takes place in Afghanistan. It follows 2 women who are living very different lives until they come into contact through just the experiences of life and the systems that are in place, especially the patriarchal systems and the marriage systems that are in place. And these women become allies in a very tentative sense and then grow their relationship from there. This book just follows the 2 of them through their very different lives that come together and become very similar as they explore, who they are and what their place is in the world, and how to find little forms of joy in a world where they're closed off from having access to living as they would like to. This book's just very powerful. If you know anything about Middle Eastern history, especially the relationships of countries like Afghanistan to other countries in the region and to larger forces abroad, the UK, the US, etc., I think your experience with this book will be really rich. But even if you don't have that even if you don't have that political understanding or historical understanding, I think you can still get a lot out of just being with the characters as they experience their lives in tandem and in relationship to a world that has so many restrictions from them. I don't know what this book is again, one of the books that I'm so glad I read, and I'm so glad that I didn't read earlier, because I really think this was the right time for me to have read it. And I'm super glad I did. I am gonna put this book in that very high category. You could tell with serious books I don't squee as much, but there are books that I just keep talking about and keep thinking about. Next, we have The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. I feel like everyone and their mom has at least heard of this book. It takes place in a dystopian world where what used to be America, all women have been assigned fundamental child family continuing roles, and the main character Offred is assigned as a surrogate and or basically a sex and pregnancy slave to a man named Fred and his wife, who is also assigned to him. The book's power is that it has no plot really at all. It's just a fascinating deep dive into a disastrous world where women are stripped of all rights and assigned to their fundamental biological duties. I've read a lot of books about restricted women, I guess, but anyways, I think, you know, you should read The Handmaid's Tale. It's short. The prose is really good because it's Margaret Atwood. The problem that I had with The Handmaid's Tale is that a lot of things are not well explained, and the world building takes a very long time to get into and understand. And that, for me, wasn't a problem when I was reading this book, because I knew that it would work out, because I knew the reputation of this book and I trust Margaret Atwood as an author enough to tell me where things are going eventually, and she did. But I think I wouldn't have given an author that I wasn't as familiar with as much credit, and so that I do cite as a fault of this book. I'm going to put this book in the dot category because, like, yeah, I was satisfied reading it. I had an okay time. There are things that were wrong with it, but it wasn't like that much of a takeaway. The reason I read The Handmaid's Tale is because for a book club with my high school friends, I have read The Testaments. The Testaments is a very different book from The Handmaid's Tale. They take place in the same universe, they follow similar characters, they are connected in direct ways, but they're very different books. The Handmaid's Tale is a testimony of one person living in the world. The Testaments, as the name implies, are the stories of multiple people living in this world who are interacting and working to directly find forms of resistance and find ways to topple the world that has done disservice after disservice to them. I've pitched the whole book. Congratulations, Erica. Okay, in some ways the book is better than The Handmaid's Tale, in that the characters are more diverse and the world is more, like, fleshed out, and you understand what's going on in a much more clear sense. You get a definite, like, there's a definite clear plot here, as opposed to The Handmaid's Tale, which is really just like a collection of fragments that kind of fit together towards a goal, but, you know, it's not really, it doesn't really make sense why it is Offred that we are following, and that's kind of part of the appeal of the book. Whereas this book is very clear why the characters we are following are the characters that we are following. The but. You can already tell which category this book is going in. The but. The ending is not good. And I don't mean the, like, postscript pieces for folks of you who have, for those of you who have read the book. I don't mean, like, that the end, like, epilogue materials. I just mean the ending. So, okay, when you're writing a book, Act 3, so, like, the end of Act 2, moving towards Act 3, a lot of things have to suddenly change around. A lot of things that we thought were given have to suddenly come into play in ways that were unexpected and new, to be entertaining and kind of, like, climactic. That's what makes the climax happen, is a combination of things that have been building coming to their logical end, and twists and turns that, like, kind of undermine and flip the expectations that we had going into Act 3, or, like, moving through the book. In The Testaments, the surprising and interesting things all happen off-page, and we're just told of them on-page in the book, and that's very dissatisfying. Like, there is a really, like, climactic moment, but there's not a lot of, like, it doesn't climax in a way, it just kind of, like, sags off into a finale type thing, and that, to me, I couldn't say that this was better than The Handmaid's Tale, because with The Handmaid's Tale, you go somewhere and it feels like it's a nice natural end. In The Testaments, it all just kind of felt like a flurry of things happen that don't really fit what I was hoping for, and so I was just dissatisfied. A lot of books for me are made or broken by their endings, because the ending's really difficult to do, and I understand that. And I think it's a sign of a good book and a good author who can pull it off in a way that makes me very satisfied. Okay, 2 more books. Y'all already know how I feel about Les Mis. I mean, you have if you've watched my review of Les Mis while baking cookies video, which is linked up there in the little cue card thing. Les Mis is going to be forever haunting me, and I shall never be free of it, and it is simultaneously one of the worst books in terms of craft and storytelling and treatment of women, and yet it is one of the best books that I've read. And so it shall go in the double squee pile. Oh boy. Go watch that video if you really want to know how I feel about Les Mis. The short version is lots of things. I feel so many things. I'm haunted. I shall never shut up about Les Mis. I have been forever changed. That is all. The last book. I've read a lot of really good books this year. I'm so sorry to keep stacking up my squee category, but here's another book that's going in it, which is The Ensemble by Aja Gabel. This is a book following a quartet of musicians, a literal quartet, they are a string quartet, for very different people who were brought together through their love of chamber music and through the decision to form a quartet between the four of them. And this book follows them throughout their adult lives as they continually decide to stay with the quartet and like what it means to be in this weird like working relationship with people, because like unlike, you know, you and your colleagues at your office job, like their art and, you know, the soul of who they are, which is stored in their art, is also bound up in three other people. And so like your life is intimately tied to their life and your emotions are intimately tied to them. And what does it mean to really go through all of those like highs and lows of life tied to three people, and not necessarily in like a marriage either. So this book is fascinating. I love it. I think if you have an understanding of music, this book will be even more powerful for you, because some of the sections where the most character work is done is also done through music, and is, I think, a very amazing reflection of what the core of the book is, which is music, and what the core of the characters are, which is music. And so the fact that every character comes to these huge character realizations and huge life decisions through music and in moments of great music, and how the plot of the music is resolved in these moments of great character choice. Oh, it all just comes together so well. It's all just so good. It's like, it's so smartly done. This book definitely feels like a masterpiece, and it feels just like a masterful work of prose. Character elements and the plot elements and the tone and motif of the book, which is music, all come together in these moments of amazing transition and amazing symphony, I guess is the only way to say it. I keep saying come together over and over again, which is, the book's called The Ensemble. Like, literally this book is about coming together. The book is about being together. And I think it was just so good. It's so good. Please read it. I can't describe all of the ways in which this book is just so masterful, but it's so good. And I vibe with all the characters, and I love the way that the prose works, and I love the way the story works, and it's just so satisfying. Please read it. So, those are all the books that I've read this year. Part 2. Part 1, again, is in a previous video where I talked about just the YA books I've read. This was just about the books marketed to adults, so a combination of nonfiction and fiction. To take inventory, in the sort of but column, the comma column, we have the Testaments, which is the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, and Ticker, which is about the Texas Medical Center, and I didn't like it because it was too pro-capitalist, which I feel bad, but there you have it. The satisfying period declarative okay books, we have The Starless Sea and The Handmaid's Tale. The books I liked, books I am excited about, Stamped from the Beginning and Making Whiteness. And then the books that I freak out about all the time now are Les Mis, as you know, The Ensemble by Aja Gabel, A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini, and Eloquent Rage by Brittany Cooper. This is a pretty representative feel of the books I read generally. I really enjoy contemporary books and historical books and books that are talking about power. I so get into nonfiction. I yell for so long about the nonfiction books and their historical merits and their scholarly merits. That's the type of person I am, the type of things that I am interested in. So I hope if you are interested in any of the things I am interested in, that you've picked up some of these books, any of these books, or you've made the conscious decision to not pick up a book I didn't like. I'm so sorry. Maybe give that book a chance. I really don't dislike any of the books in this category. Like, I really did not dislike any books, and there are no books in this list across videos, even the ones that I put in the ... category. Like, there were no books that I threw across the room. Throwing Across the Room books are going to be in their own category. I've only read a couple of them ever in my life, and I probably wouldn't have even finished them to put them in a video. So with that, I am going to leave you now, and I hope that this worked out and that you enjoyed yourself.